Paul is going to speak to this of the faith of the Russian Old Believers. And we do have a picture. I'm going to flash to the picture and then come back. Because many of us, we say Russian Old Believers, we have an idea. But the folks in our community who dress a bit like what Paul has got on, but this is the traditional dress of the Russian Old Believers. So we see these are kids in our grade schools. There are people that we see at the grocery store, but it is a culture that has managed to remain very much apart. If you want to pop back, Aiden, that's okay. So again, do you want to keep that up there?
That's a really beautiful picture of a good family.
Okay.
All dressed in the traditional clothing.
Traditional clothing.
Yeah.
So, Paul, you are not an old believer, even though you have got the fabulous shirt on and the belt on. Would you tell us how you came to your background of knowing what you know and what you have to share with us about the old believer?
Okay, Pastor Leah, thank you. You know, after working with old believers for 27 years, I worked with their families. I was a teacher at 91 Elementary School out there with Ski Hill and Hubbard. 27 years, you get to know the people. And you get to know, after coming into their homes, I had to work in this migrant program at first. And the kids that were in our neighborhood or in our school district were considered to be migrants because they worked at the berry fields. They were all out there, the kids even picking berries, and I had to go at the beginning of the school and sign them up so I got to meet the parents. They invited me into their homes. There was a few restrictions as to what I could do, but after being with them and all the things that I learned about them, it was like, hey, this is a great religion. And then years later, when my dad was kind of, opening up about his past, I found out that my grandparents were old believers. They were from the Russian Orthodox faith. My dad, during the Russian times when they had what they call the Pentecostal fire and the Baptists were coming into Russia in the early 1900s, what happened is there was a lot of evangelization, and my dad got converted, so he left the Russian Orthodox, and he never wanted to talk about it, and he never wanted to show anything, any affiliation with that. But when I found out, I said, wow, maybe that's why I was drawn to these Russian old believers, and that was part of my destiny to work with them, because I had a heritage going way back with them. So when I was working with the kids, they were bringing me all kind of stuff. When they brought me things, I cherished them, and especially, I have to share you one of the major ones, but maybe later on when you have a chance you can come up here. This is the book of David. We know it as Psalms. And it's written in Church Slavonic. Church Slavonic goes back almost 1,000 years when Russia was Christianized in 988. That's over 1,000 years ago. They had a couple missionaries, Kirill and Methodiy Kilan. They came into the territory of Ukraine. It was Kiev in Russia at that time. And they brought the Russian Church Slavonic. And they taught the people that. And one of the things that they taught them, besides the language, was a new religion. I'm sure you've heard of paganism and all that, and people saying, well, these guys did not believe in God or the Christian religion. What they believed in were nature spirits. They had Perun, the god of thunder, or like the Norse have their deities that have things connected with nature. So when I started working with the kids, and they would bring me things, I started becoming very curious. And the teachers that I worked with, they were also very curious. Who are these people? I said, well, I found out, during the 1600s, in fact, it was 1666. Wait a minute, 666? Oh yeah, that's the number of the beast kind of thing. So these people, at that time, they split from the Orthodox Church. And they became the old believers. They tried to stick with the old ritual. Some of them call them the old ritualists. So I said, okay, that's kind of curious, because here's a bunch of people that are changing from this new reform that's going on, and they say, wait a minute, we're not going to go with that. We're going to go back to the old ways. So they kind of started saying, we don't want anything to do with reform. And I think you as the people that within the Lutheran will know about that, because there's a big Reformation going on there. But people that didn't want to go with the Reformation, they stuck to the old stuff. So they stuck with the old stuff. The old. One of the things that they stuck with, and it was always curious to me, why is it such a big deal? But they said, it is a big deal. They are the kind of people that love to cross themselves. And when they use the fingers to cross themselves, they say, you have to do it with 2 fingers, not with 3 fingers. There was a big deal with them. So, when the kids started telling me these things, I said, well, that's kind of interesting. Why the 2 fingers was so important? Well, the dual nature, and the divinity, man and God in one, and in the person of Christ, and then the Trinity with the 3. Okay. So I started asking questions. I started finding out, here's a group of people that had come from the old country. I call it the old country because that was the old Russia. Some of you might have heard of Peter the Great. Peter the Great was one of those guys that tried to change these people. They stuck with the beards. Now, if you notice, I have the traditional Russian shirt and a traditional belt that the mother of, I have about 6 of her kids in my classes, so she gave me an honorary belt. It was almost like an honorary degree. I felt pretty proud of it. It has my name on it and everything. But the idea of these people sticking to their old ways, it has to do with their belief that God has a beard. You keep a beard because God. Hey, Michelangelo, who's been in the Sistine Chapel? I have been there. I've seen it up there on the ceiling. God has a beard. So they decided they have to keep a beard. So here's a bunch of people that said if you cut your beard, you're not observing the true nature of God. You're not. You're supposed to be like God and say that this is what He looks like, and you should look the same. There was a lot of different explanations about that, and I kind of, as I was listening to these kids, I tried to, take it all up with a grain of salt. 1 year, while I was teaching these little kids, they're first, second graders, I started out in the first grade, and these kids come to me and say, you're they call it pagani, which means like a Gentile, or pagan, because I was not wearing a beard. Even though I spoke the language, I'm a fluent Russian speaker, they would tell me I wasn't one of them. So I grew a beard 1 year. They said, you still aren't one of us because you don't come to our church, You don't come and pray with us, and, you don't do the cross and bow down. By the way, when they bow down in their churches, it's kind of interesting. They throw one of these, this is like a pillow, but they have a flat surface. They'll throw it on the ground and bow down in the churches, almost like the Muslims do. It was kind of curious to me, maybe they got it from them, this idea of bowing down to the ground. But, they have a lot of different traditions, a lot of different cultural things that when you look at them and say, well, why did they do these things? Because from the outside, we're always asking why. We're kind of curious. And the thing about me, as my curiosity was stirred up, and I tried to become one of them, and tried to interact with them, they liked me, but they still wouldn't allow me to be one of them. Like when I went to their homes, if you go to one of their homes, they won't let you eat at the same table with them or from the same dishes because you are considered unclean. I never could understand that concept because to me, Christianity is we are all one in Christ kind of idea, right? And to have one of your fellow people say, well, you're unclean. Because I consider that the Russian Orthodox an offshoot of Greek Orthodox, from the Eastern Orthodox faith, to be just another offshoot of Roman Catholicism, which goes back to Christianity, maybe the early church and all that. So it's like a big tree with different shoots and branches and all that kind of stuff. I had that concept of oneness, whereas to them it was, no, you're not one of us. See? So it kind of rubbed me the wrong way for a while, but I said, well, no, I can't do that. I'm a teacher. I'm supposed to learn from the kids too. I have to accommodate myself to them, not have them accommodate themselves to me. So even though, we don't teach religion in schools, public schools are not supposed to talk about God and all that kind of stuff, that's not true. I talk about that stuff with them all the time. Even when it was like in first grade, we finally mainstreamed them, and we had American kids and Russian kids playing together in the same classroom. It was still, they would want to talk about their stuff. Like one day it's raining, and the kids come in to me and say, Mr. Rogowski, Mother Mary is crying. Look at her, she's crying all over the place. Their idea of Mother Mary is like, she's the mother of God. And what I learned from them is that when we have the word Bogorodica, it's not just the Virgin Mary. This means mother of God. So when they used to tell me stories about Bogorodica, and I'm curious about that. Because in the Protestant religion that I grew up in, like that, with the evangelical movement, and so that was what I was growing up with. We never talked about the Mother of God. She was just someone that we talked about during Christmas time as the Virgin Mary. That was it, giving birth to Jesus. But to me, it was like a new concept, a new way of thinking, and so, when they started telling me these things, I was curious. My curiosity led me to the churches. I started going to the churches. I started attending. They even invited me. Come on, Mr. Rogowski, you got to come and see us in our church. Sometimes they have a family gathering or something. Hey, come on over. So after a few years, it was like I got to know them pretty well. And they got to know me because the kids would tell the parents, hey, he's a good teacher. He likes us. We like him and all that kind of stuff. That's how you get along, So to me, it was like, when they come to the house, they'd give me some briaga. Now, briaga is you guys know about these berry fields all around here in the Willamette Valley, Mount Angel, Hubbard, all the Lutheran, those areas. The berries that they grew, they turned into wine. Like the miracle of Jesus turning water into wine. These guys would turn the berries into wine. So the idea of having a drink, when I came to the house, they gave me some of that. Well, it was like 14% wine. I felt like, I couldn't let them down, say I can't have any of that. Because, I felt, they were trying to be hospitable. So when I come to their homes, in the corner, they would have icons. I don't know if you see it on that picture, but way in the back behind the mother, there is a little icon with some clothing, actually some cloth behind it, very picturesque, flowery. When you would enter the home, you would first bow down to the icon, because the icon is like the spirit of the house. It represents the spiritual center of their home, and you always respect the spiritual center of the home first before you shake hands with the family that you're visiting. So those are some of the things I started learning. And the more I learned, the teachers were saying, well, you've been working with these people, tell us about them. And I said, well, I'm learning more and more and more and more. Maybe I should put it together into a book. So after working with them for about 5 years, I put it into a book. Actually, right now it's published on Amazon, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave some. I wish I knew there's going to be so many people here. I didn't think there's going to be so many. there's a printout with my webpage that has a link to the book that's selling now on Amazon if you're really curious about the Old Believers. But at first, before I did that for the teachers, I did a collection of Old Believer history and tradition. Where did he come from? How they traveled from Russia, escaping St. Peter's, trying to cut off their beard. No, not St. Peter, Peter the Great of Russia, which some of them considered him to be a saint. And what happened is that when he tried to persecute them and make them do the things the way he wanted them, they decided to run away. They were running away to China. They were running away to Brazil later on. Finally, they came to the Willamette Valley in the 1960s. So their history and their tradition, I decided to put into a collection. I just compiled it from different sources that I was getting. It wasn't like that historical fiction book that I wrote. The historical fiction was when I had gotten all this information, I tried to make a story out of it. How they came from China. There's a heroine, Masha, which is really a Russianized form of Maria. She's the hero in my story. And it has to do all with the mother. If you look at their calendar, church calendar, there's about 7 holidays they observe just for the mother. The mother is revered in the form of the Mother of God. And of course, there's the other holidays. There's about 22. And that was one of the problems that we had in schools. As a teacher, they would miss school. These kids would have these holidays. They call them holy days. We wouldn't have school for them. They wouldn't have school. They'd be out there going to church. And one day I decided to go out there too and see what they're doing. Because initially I was working only with the Russian Old Believers. So I'd go there and they would stand in church for hours. I mean, you guys are sitting here very comfortably. Imagine if you had to stand for all this time trying to listen to something. So it'd be a little harder on your feet. So the people that they do it on all the holy days. They have long Easter processions. Christmas is a big one with them, of course. So I started doing a lot of that research just to go see what these people are all about and what they believe, how they believe these things, and why. It became a curious thing for me. One of the things I discovered during all this time was they had a lot of weddings too. One lady came and she did a fantastic film on the Old Believers with their wedding, their homes, and everything else. I finally located it and I was able to put it on my website. My website has a link to it. So if any of you are really curious to see and to hear them, the chanting, they have the liturgical chanting, this kind of sing-song, Gregorian type, and it was like something, I think I should tell you this story. I'm going to just have a little, something to tell you here. How did Christianity come to Russia? In 988, Princess Olga was looking for she was trying to get a religion to come, get the people together, unified under something. So she sent, and Prince Vladimir was the other guy, sent out emissaries to go to the churches. They went to the Greek Orthodox, the Roman Orthodox, the Muslims, and they said, you guys find out which one is the best religion. And so these emissaries went out, and then they came back, and the emissaries said, we were at this place where it was kind of solemn and quiet, and the people were not too lively. We didn't like that too much. And then we went to this place where people were just doing all kind of funny things that we didn't, it didn't look very religious or spiritual. And then they said, then when we came to the Greek Orthodox Church, and Byzantium, Constantinople, which was the center, this huge Hagia Sophia temple, which is still revered all around the world. They said, when we heard the singing and the chanting, and we felt like we were in heaven. Let's choose this religion. So they basically copied from the Greek Orthodox. They brought the religion onto Russian soil. The Russians, I guess, made it Russian. And all of a sudden, it's like they had a religion and unified the people, and the people had a way of communicating with the divine. And so, those of you that are really interested in some of this stuff, I'm going to put this out here too. One of the things about the old believers is, the reason they're called old believers, like I said, is because they have the old ritual. But, you know, talking about the modern days, they're not really that old anymore. If you go to Pennsylvania and see the Amish, or the Jews with their Hasidism, and, you know, they really, every part of their life is old. But the old believers now, they'll go for your new cars, their fancy TVs, your fancy homes. They'll build, get everything that American society has to offer, except the religion and the culture and the tradition. They will not allow their kids to marry outside of their own faith. If they do, they get excommunicated. So part of the idea of being an old believer is that you have the religion, but you do not necessarily have to stick with the old ways like the Amish do with the horse and buggy. You know, they have the nice cars, and of course the young kids, when they see the American culture, they say, we want to have some of this too. When I was teaching in the 80s, I started in 1976, it was like, they were into rock and roll. The kids wanted to be just like the other kids. When they got out of school, they'd go down maybe to the restaurants, which they weren't supposed to do. They weren't supposed to eat at the American restaurants, the American food. They were supposed to have their own food. So the young people started changing. They also started speaking English most of the time. So the only Russian they had was at home, and in the church, which they used the Church Slavonic. Now, if some of you want to take a look later on at Old Church Slavonic, what it looks like, I had to take an Old Church Slavonic course when I was studying in San Francisco State. I was going for my master's in Russian. So it was like destiny had that in store for me. My professor said, this might come in handy for you. So when I came to the job that I had got in the 91 school, it was like, okay, now I know what my destiny is. I was supposed to be here with the old believers. I can read the books. They bring me books. I can read their apocryphal books. They don't just have the Bible. They have tons of apocryphal books, literature that some of these saints, John Chrysostom and others that wrote books and liturgy and everything, they have those that they use, and some of them in their services. So by understanding Church Slavonic, I was able to become more familiar with what they were all about. So, one of the things that I would, it's hard for me to say how for you to approach the old believers. Most of them won't want to touch or shake hands with you because you've got to remember, all of us are unclean in their eyes. Perception, mental perception is one of those things, what you think, and how you see others. But after a while, I decided, hey, I know I'm not unclean, so I'm going to try to act with them and interact with them on an equal footing. Try to talk with them. Ask them questions. I know all of you have seen them somewhere here because they're in Silverton and in Mount Angel, Woodburn, Jarvis, all over the place, all over the Willamette Valley, and Salem even. Some of them, because of their strict faith, have decided to move out. And it wasn't only the strict faith, they were also looking for partners for marriage. Whenever the young kids got to the age of about 14, 15, the girls especially, they were thinking, we don't want them getting married to American guys. We got to look for Russian guys. Where are we going to find them? We don't, after a while, you run out of members in the church that you can intermarry with. So some of them would go up to Canada. Some of them would go back to the east in New Jersey. They had some old believers that came through from Turkey into New Jersey area. Some of them would go up into Alberta in Canada. Some of them in Alaska. Some of them even moved back to South America. There was in the 80s, I don't know if you remember, but in the 80s there was a big scare. There was going to be the mark of the beast put on the people's foreheads. And there was going to be the end of the world kind of thing. They're really into that scary end of the world scenario. And so some of them even went back to South America because of that. But the young kids, they had to find partners. They're going to go find partners. But, the sad thing is they will not partner up with Americans. Those that do are automatically excommunicated, thrown out of the church, disgraced. It was like, poor people, it's like, they can't come back to the church unless they go through some long period of penance. And penance means you have to, I don't know if you've ever been in one of their churches. I've seen the kind of Orthodox churches where there's iconoclasts in the front with their icons, and then the whole meeting hall, and in the back there's a place for people to stand. Well, you'd be in the back of the church. It's like being in the back of the bus. Very segregated, and you feel like you're an outcast. But they would allow some people to come back to a penance time. But when I meet with them, I meet with them on an equal footing because I speak the language. That's right away a foot in the door. And their language is basically the same like the modern Russian, except for a few idiosyncrasies, a few slang words here and there. They speak the same language today as before. When I was teaching, I tried to have classes, electives, and the 6th grade for them. There's a place in Woodburn, a school that is trying to teach Russian from 1st to 3rd, so the kids don't lose their first language, native language from their parents. But all in all, they're Americanized right now. When you meet them and talk to them, you'll notice that some of the parents will be even talking English to the kids. So I would recommend, whenever you meet one of them, say, hey, hi, Zdorov живешь. Learn a few words in Russian. Zdorov живешь means to your health. How you doing? You won't want to greet them with their Christian greetings or old believer greetings, like when they come in the house, they would cross themselves to the icon. They say, "Milosti prosim." That means, we beg you mercy, be merciful. I guess that goes way back to the 1600s, how they would greet, I had to take an old Church Slavonic course when I was studying in San Francisco State. I was going for my master's in Russian. So it was like destiny had that in store for me. My professor said, this might come in handy for you. So when I came to the job that I got in the 91 school, it was like, okay, now I know what my destiny is. I was supposed to be here, to be with the old believers. I can read the books. They bring me books. I can read their apocryphal books. They don't just have the Bible. They have tons of apocryphal books, literature that some of these saints, John of Chrysostom and others that wrote books and liturgy and everything, they have those.
that they use, and some of them in their services. So by understanding Church Slavonic, I was able to become more familiar with what they were all about. So, one of the things that I would, it's hard for me to say for you to approach the old believers. Most of them won't want to touch or shake hands with you because you got to remember, all of us are unclean in their eyes. Mental perception is one of those things, what you think, and how you see others. But after a while, I decided, hey, I know I'm not unclean, so I'm going to try to act with them and interact with them on an equal footing. Try to talk with them. Ask them questions. I know all of you have seen them somewhere here because they're in Silverton and in Mount Angel, Woodburn, Jarvis, all over the place, all over the Willamette Valley and Salem even. Some of them, because of their strict faith, have decided to move out. And it wasn't only the strict faith. They were also looking for partners for marriage. Whenever the young kids got to the age of about 14, 15, the girls especially, they were thinking, we don't want them getting married to American guys. We got to look for Russian guys. Where are we going to find them? We don't, after a while, you run out of members in the church that you can intermarry with. So some of them would go up to Canada. Some of them would go back to the east in New Jersey. They had some old believers that came through from Turkey into New Jersey area. Some of them would go up into Alberta and Canada. Some of them in Alaska. Some of them even moved back to South America. There was in the 80s, I don't know if you remember, but in the 80s there was a big scare. There was going to be the mark of the beast put on the people's foreheads. And there was going to be the end of the world kind of thing. They're really into that scary end of the world scenario. And so some of them even went back to South America because of that. But the young kids, they had to find partners. They're going to go find partners. But, the sad thing is they will not partner up with Americans. Those that do are automatically excommunicated, thrown out of the church, disgraced. It was like poor people, it's like, they can't come back to the church unless they go through some long period of penance. And penance means you have to, I don't know if you've ever been in one of their churches. I've seen the kind of Orthodox churches where there's iconoclastasis in the front with their icons, and then the whole meeting hall, and in the back there's a place for people to stand. Well, you'd be in the back of the church. It's like being in the back of the bus. Very segregated, and you feel like you're an outcast. But they would allow some people to come back through a penance time. But when I meet with them, I meet with them on an equal footing because I speak the language. That's right away a foot in the door. And their language is basically the same like the modern Russian, except for a few idiosyncrasies, a few slang words here and there. But they speak the same language today as before. When I was teaching, I tried to have classes, electives, and the 6th grade for them. There's a place in Woodburn, a school that is trying to teach Russian from 1st through 3rd so the kids don't lose their first language, native language from their parents. But all in all, they're Americanized right now. When you meet them and talk to them, you'll notice that some of the parents will be even talking English to the kids. So I would recommend whenever you meet one of them, say, hey, hi, zdorov живешь. Or learn a few words in Russian. Zdorov живешь means to your health. How you doing? you won't want to greet them with their Christian greetings or old believer greetings. Like when they come in the house, they would cross themselves to their icon and they say, "Milosti prosim." That means, "We beg you of mercy, be merciful." That was, I guess that goes way back to the 1600s, how they would greet each, and the response would be, the "Yom milosti." Then we're merciful to you. We accept you as you are, kind of thing. The old believers have this way of looking at us that reminds me of bias, prejudice, and all the divisions that we have in the world from one to the other. But I don't think that should stop us from trying to be friendly with them. I think we should recognize that is an ingrained, taught kind of thing that they propagate through their children. And although the children, when they get to be the teenagers, they start rebelling. I remember one of the funniest things for me when I was an elementary school teacher, these kids would come to school dressed, especially the girls, dressed in their long dresses, and they would look like, old believer kids. But then when it came to PE time or something, or recess time, they would take that off. They'd have pants underneath, and they'd be playing basketball and being right there with the American kids, feeling Americanized. So, traditionally they're like that. But they'll also, come out and try to wear American clothes at times. I was talking with Pastor Lee about questions, but you said that probably...
Yeah, we're not going to really do pictures. I do have a couple for you, though.
Yeah,
I do have a couple for you.
Sure.
Is there music during worship? Is there musical instruments during worship?
No musical instruments. They believe that the voice of the human being is the voice that God has given you, and you use that as an instrument, and they would, hallelujah, they would chant, And if you listen to one of these films, and I also have a guy that came from Reuters that was doing a film about him. He had some chants. You'd see how they do the voice. Very melodic, yeah.
I also found it interesting, the whole business of Old Believer, because I always knew that they used the old calendar.
Yes.
But now we know why, because they're holding on to the old ways.
Right.
That's the old calendar.
Yes.
And the last thought I had was this insider-outsider thing, the us and them thing. But it's very much about preserving the way of life.
Yeah.
Because if their children marry outside of the faith, it will not take long until the faith is gone.
Exactly, and the American would say, "Hey, you got to get baptized into my church, and you got to follow my religion instead of yours."
Yeah.
That's what would happen.
One last question: the clothing. The clothing is one of the cultural pieces
Yes.
that has been held on to.
That's how they identify themselves.
Okay, so that is really much about knowing when I'm running across another.
Right.
Old believer.
Yeah. Whenever a man sees another man with a beard, that's an old believer. Especially if he hasn't trimmed it, he lets it grow nice and long. Yeah, that's an old believer. And the belt is a very identifying piece. This belt that I have, like I say, it was an honorary one, and I felt like an old believer when I wore it. And when I did a lot of presentations when I was teaching. I'm retired now for 14 years. I haven't done this since then. But I feel like I identify with them when I do this. And I always like to say nice things. I don't like to do disparaging things because I feel like that's their way of approaching
The world.
the world,
And their point of
the
view,
divinity, our understanding of what everything the universe is all about, including God.
Okay, I have a final question. Among the old believers, do you think it's more important for them to preserve the customs and the language or preserving the faith and the liturgy?
I would say it's the liturgy.
It is. It's
I
still
would
the
think
faith
so.
piece. Because for the
Yeah.
Amish, so much of it is about the customs.
Yeah.
But you would say for the old believers, it really is about the faith.
It is the faith, and the faith manifests itself in many different ways. One of the ways that I didn't like the way it manifested itself, when I first started teaching in 1976, there were 3 old believer churches. Then they started splitting up, and now there's like 11 of them. And one of them went the way of the priest class. From 1666, they decided they weren't going to belong to the priestly class anymore, to the Orthodox way, the Reforms and all that. So they were without priests. All of a sudden, this one guy, Brother Ambrose in Mount Angel,
Oh,
he
yes,
was
I met him.
You met him? Well, he passed away not too long ago, but he brought a priest in from Romania and said, hey, we're going to make a priestly class here. He wanted to control the old believers. So they have a church now that has a priestly class, ordained, laying of hands and all that. So that's an interesting kind of schism that's going on.
Yeah. Clearly, we could go on and on and on.
Yes.
Thank you so much
I
for the gift of bringing your experience to us. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.